There's a quiet moment that often happens after diagnosis. The strange, suspended silence where everything you know about your life suddenly changes shape. You can still hear the hum of the hospital, the shuffle of slippers down the hallway, the voice of the nurse explaining the next steps. But inside, you've gone completely still. And then slowly, the emotion starts to arrive. Fear, disbelief, maybe even anger. Grief that feels too big to name. And yet, if you look around the hospital room, everyone is trying their best to be calm, composed, and strong. And we tell ourselves, I should be brave, I shouldn't cry here, I just need to focus on getting better, I have to be brave. But what if I told you that your emotions, yes, your emotions belong here, that they have a place in the hospital room, right next to your IV stand where your chemo drips, your medications, and your treatment plan. Because emotions are not interruptions to healing. They are a part of it. Welcome to the Life Tula podcast, where we talk about the things most people avoid. Cancer, grief, dying, and the radical act of healing. We hold space here not just for surviving, but for living fully, honestly, and deeply. I am Charity Marohamsar, cancer coach, grief companion, and your guide through this tender terrain. Today, I want to talk to you about what it means to bring your full emotional self into your healing, and why your tears, your fears, your anger, and even your laughter are not distractions from the work of recovery. They're signs that your body, mind, and soul are still alive, still reaching for wholeness. Let's talk about the myth of emotional strength. You see, we've been taught for so long that emotional strength means composure, that to stay strong is to hide our feelings behind a smile or a nod. And when you're in treatment, that message gets even louder. You're surrounded by people who are trying their best to help you. Your doctors, nurses, caregivers, your own family, your love givers. And you feel this invisible pressure to make it easier for everyone. To be the good patient, the one who doesn't cry too much, or complain too much, or question too much. But emotional strength isn't pretending you're okay. It's about being honest with what is real. I've sat with so many cancer warriors who whisper, I don't want to be a burden to anyone. I don't want to impose. And I always tell them, your emotions are not a burden. They're evidence that you're still deeply human. Tears are not setback. They're the body's way of releasing what the soul can't hold any longer. And anger is not rebellion. It's a protest of love. Love for life, love for what you're fighting for. And grief, that deep ache that never quite goes away? Grief is love with nowhere to go. So emotions are really messengers. In a whole person care, we don't try to silence or stifle the emotions. We listen to them. Because emotions are really messengers. They tell us what's hurting, what's happening in our heads, what's been lost, and what's still worth hoping for. Fear, for example, might be telling you you need reassurance, you need safety, or anger might be saying something about this situation feels unjust or out of control. And sadness might be whispering, I miss who I used to be before this diagnosis, before cancer happened. So when we ignore these messengers, they don't disappear. They simply find other ways to speak through exhaustion, sleeplessness, tension, or even the feeling of being so disconnected from yourself. But when you allow them to have a voice, when you let the tears fall, when you let the silence sit between you and your doctor for a moment longer than usual, something begins to shift. You make room for healing that goes deeper than the physical. Because real healing doesn't only happen in your body, it happens in your story. Let's talk about the honest room. Imagine for a moment if hospital rooms were designed not only for procedures and checkups, but also for honesty. A room where it's safe to say, I'm scared. A room where it's okay to laugh at something that feels absurdly funny in the middle of all the seriousness. A room where you don't have to hide the fact that you miss your old life. I've seen this kind of room come to life. It's what we try to create when we bring a community into care. A space where you're not just a patient, you're a whole person with a heart that feels, with a heart that breaks and heals in its own rhythm. Because healing is not linear. It's circular. Some days you feel strong and hopeful. Other days you feel small, defeated, and uncertain. And both days belong. Whole person care means making space for both. When we talk about emotional honesty, it doesn't mean you have to pour everything out to everyone. It simply means that you stop pretending that emotions are shameful. It's giving yourself permission to say, I don't have to be the brave one today. Can you say that again? I don't have to be the brave one today. It's allowing yourself to rest in the truth that emotions are not problems to fix. They're signals to pay attention to. When you bring emotional honesty into your healing, you literally create a bridge between what's happening inside and what's happening outside. Your doctors can treat the illness. Your community can support your body, but only you can tell the truth about what's happening here in your heart. And that truth is powerful. It's part of your recovery story. There's often a moment, usually this happens late at night, when everything you've been holding in starts to surface. Maybe it's after visiting hours, when the hospital gets quiet. Maybe it's at home, when the house finally stills. And I really get more calls at night from my patients because it's when everyone is not in the room and all the thoughts, all the emotions are coming in their space. So you try to keep yourself busy during the day, appointments, medication, meeting up with friends on Zoom, test results. But when the noise fades, the tears come. If that's you, I want you to know this. It's okay. You don't have to apologize for feeling. You don't have to explain why you're crying. Your tears are part of your healing language. There's something sacred about tears. They don't ask for permission. They just fall. They wash away the unsaid words, the what ifs, the regrets, the fears. They remind you that even in all the uncertainty, your body still remembers how to release. In a quiet way, that's the body cooperating with the spirit. Sometimes in those late night tears, there's a whisper of faith. Not necessarily religious, but a sense that something greater than you, something more powerful than you, is holding you together when you feel like falling apart. For some, that sense of presence feels like peace that comes from nowhere. For others, it's the reminder that God sees even when no one else does. Let's talk about anger, the emotion we're often most afraid of. Many warriors tell me, I feel guilty for being angry. I should just be grateful to be alive. But anger is not the opposite of gratitude. It's the companion of longing. Anger says, this is not how I want life to go. I miss my old body. I miss my old life. I wish people understood what this really feels like. When you name your anger honestly, you create a space for compassion to grow. Because underneath every angry outburst or quiet frustration is usually grief. The grief of losing what once was. And when you honor that grief, the anger begins to soften. It stops being destructive and it becomes instructive. It shows you where healing is still needed, not just physically, but emotionally. Fear, too, has a message. It tells us we care deeply about something, that we want to live, that we want to see tomorrow. But fear can also grow loud. It can take over if it's left alone. The goal is not to silence fear, but to walk with it, to acknowledge it, and still take the next step. Sometimes that step is medical, like showing up for treatment even when you'd rather not. Sometimes it's emotional, like letting someone in when you want to withdraw. And sometimes it's spiritual, whispering a short prayer, not because you're sure of what to say, but because you hope someone is listening. There's a verse in the book of Psalms that says, when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. It doesn't say if I'm afraid, but when. Fear is expected, but so is trust. Healing doesn't require you to erase fear, just to let it exist alongside faith. However small that faith may be. If emotions belong in the hospital room, so does community. Because the truth is, emotions heal best when they are witnessed. Something shifts when you share your story with someone who listens, not to fix, not to advise, but to simply be there. When you see someone's eyes soften as you speak, when you hear, I understand, the isolation begins to break. This is why the work of cancer care can never just be about medicine. Medicine heals the body, but community helps the soul to stay alive inside that body. When we talk about wholeness, this is what we mean. Every part of you matters. The physical, the emotional, the relational, the spiritual. Healing happens in connection. Grief is one of those companions that walks in quietly and refuses to leave. It doesn't matter if your scans are clear or if treatment is over, grief lingers. It shows up in small things. The hairbrush that gathers dust, the date on the calendar when you're first diagnosed, the smell of the hospital disinfectant that still brings back memories. And yet grief is also a teacher. It teaches us that love leaves an imprint, that every goodbye, whether it's to a part of your body, a version of your life, or a person you've lost along the way, matters deeply. So many warriors ask, when will the sadness end? And the gentle truth is, maybe it's not supposed to end in the way we imagine. Maybe grief isn't something that finishes. Maybe it's something to carry differently. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it's silence, or the way you look out the window a little longer. It's the ache that says, I once had something beautiful. When you stop fighting your grief, you start to make peace with it. You begin to realize it's part of your wholeness. Not a wound to erase, but a space that can hold meaning, memory, and even gratitude. One of the most powerful things we can offer anyone in the hospital room, patient or a love giver, is permission. Permission to feel. Permission to rest. Permission not to have all the answers. And even permission to cry. When we grant emotional permission, healing takes on a different quality. The body relaxes, the mind softens, the spirit opens. Sometimes the greatest act of care you can give yourself is to whisper, I'm allowed to feel this. That small sentence is truly liberating. When emotions are given permission to exist, they don't consume you, they transform you. You move from suppressing to processing, from enduring to embracing. People often think healing is about visible progress, the numbers on the chart, the scans that comes back clean, but there's also the unseen work, the inner mending that happens quietly as you process, as you forgive and hope again. That's the work emotions help you do. They bring what's hidden to light. When you let yourself feel sadness, you make room for compassion. When you let yourself feel anger, you move deeper to justice and truth. When you let yourself feel joy, even small flickers of it, you remind yourself that life is still beautiful in fragments. True healing doesn't mean life goes back to how it was before. It means you become more at peace with what is and more tender toward yourself and others who suffer. I've seen what happens when emotions are welcomed in care spaces. A patient starts laughing with her nurse after a long, painful week, and suddenly the air feels lighter. A family finally cries together instead of taking turns being the strong one, and somehow the silence afterward feels healing. A doctor pauses long enough to ask, how are you really? And that single question becomes medicine. Whole person care starts with moments like this. Not grand gestures, just genuine presence. When emotions are welcome, people stop feeling like cases and start feeling like humans again. And in that human space, the body often responds, sometimes subtly, sometimes profoundly, because the body and soul are not separate rooms, they're in one home. If you're listening today as a love giver, this message is for you too. Your emotions belong in the hospital room just as much as anyone else's. You carry so much. The appointments, the phone calls, the practical things, the very long patience you accord to your loved one who's sick. But also the emotional load of watching someone you love go through something you can't control. You may think you need to stay composed, but even love givers need space to cry, to rest, to feel afraid. Your tears don't weaken your support, they make it real. Your honesty doesn't burden the patient, it invites mutual trust. Remember, emotional honesty is contagious in the best way. When you show up as your authentic self, others feel safe to do the same. One of the tender surprises of emotional healing is that eventually joy finds its way back in. Not loud carnival joy, but quiet joy. Joy that shows up when sunlight hits your hospital bed at just the right angle. Joy that slips in through music, laughter, or the smile of someone bringing you your soup for the day. Joy doesn't erase pain, it sits beside it. When you've gone through deep sorrow, joy doesn't feel like denial. It feels like mercy. It's as if somewhere in the middle of all that is unresolved, life is saying, I'm still here with you. And maybe that's what grace feels like. Not a sudden miracle, but a steady nearness that refuses to leave. Sometimes when emotions are heavy and words are few, faith begins quietly. Not in sermons or long prayers, but in a sigh, a whisper, a question. God, are you here? God, are you listening? And somehow in the stillness, you realize that the presence you're searching for has been here all along. In the compassion of others, in your resilience, in the strength you didn't know you had. One verse that always feels gentle in moments like this comes from Psalms. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Even if your faith feels fragile, know that healing is never only a physical process, it's something that touches the deepest parts of who we are. As you listen to this, maybe you're in the middle of treatment. Maybe you're in recovery or walking with someone who is. Wherever you are, I want you to hear this. Your emotions are not in the way of healing. They're guiding you toward it. If you've been holding things in, maybe this week is the time to start letting something out. Safely, gently, with people you trust. If you've been scared to feel, maybe now is the moment to give yourself permission. Healing doesn't demand perfection. It invites participation. And participation includes your heart. You don't have to move on. You just have to keep moving. One honest emotion at a time. We often say healing happens in circles, not in isolation. That's why spaces like the upcoming Cancer Thrivers Summit exists, to remind each of us that our stories are so connected. When you step in a room filled with people who understand the same language of pain, hope, and courage, something powerful happens. Shame begins to lose its grip. You realize you are not strange or weak for feeling deeply. You are human, and you are among others who get it. The Cancer Thrivers Summit isn't just an event. It's a gathering of hearts that survived and are still choosing to live fully. It's a space where emotions are not hidden but honored. And maybe that's the larger invitation for all of us, to build communities, homes, and hospitals, and circles of care where honesty is the norm and emotions are welcome guests. As we close this episode, I want to leave you with this thought. Healing isn't the absence of pain. It's the integration of everything you've lived through. Your emotions are not enemies, they're the language through which your body and soul speak to each other. When you allow yourself to feel, you're not being weak. You're practicing courage. When you allow yourself to cry, you're not giving up. You're letting something sacred be released. When you allow yourself to hope again, even after disappointment, you're stepping into the mystery of life that continues. So maybe the next time you find yourself in a hospital room or in a quiet space after an appointment, you can remind yourself, my emotions belong here. My humanity belongs here. And so does my healing. Because healing isn't just what happens in the body, it's what happens when truth and tenderness meet in the same room. And when that happens, the hospital room becomes a holy ground. Not because everything is fixed, but because everything that's real is finally welcome. Thank you for joining me today on the Life Doula podcast. If this episode spoke to you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need a reminder that emotions are part of healing too. And if you're part of our community, I hope to see you soon at the Cancer Thrivers Summit, the Future of Cancer Care, a space where we continue to work this healing together, heart by heart, story by story. Until then, take care of your body, your mind, and your heart. They all belong in your healing story.